what is likely your lunchtime with us today. My name is Mark Alexander, and I'm the Microsoft Practice Manager here at Prescriptive Data Solutions. As you can see on this slide, I'm also a senior engineer. So yes, I do get my hands on the keyboard, as some of you in attendance already know. Here at Prescriptive, we're a Microsoft CSP solutions partner. We sell and manage Microsoft subscriptions, and every day we work alongside customers like you, providing professional and consulting services across the Microsoft ecosystem. Truth be told, I'm relatively new to the consulting side, but I came here after more than 25 years on the corporate side, managing my own IT teams, environments, budgets, and my own Microsoft 365 tenants. I share that because that explains why I'm so passionate about this stuff. And to be honest, I've walked in your shoes. As the Microsoft Practice Manager, my focus today is Microsoft's approach to AI. Now, that said, Microsoft is not the only AI work happening at Prescriptive. Our other practices are also exploring private and locally hosted models, AI coding agents such as Codex, and the broader frameworks used to connect AI to real systems and workflows. Buckle up, I apologize, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I will be moving fast. And please note that we are recording this webinar and we'll publish it out on our website along with all the previous ones we've held. So let's get going. So we're going to be focusing today on what I would like to call three lenses. You probably saw it in the summary of the webinar. Basically, lens one is going to be a walkthrough of all of the Copilot AI features that Microsoft has available today. And then we'll dive in deep into each one of those, kind of helping you understand what they are. We're going to spend about 15 minutes. Lens two will dive into the controls and what governance and configurations surround each one of those components, another 15 minutes there. And then we'll end with a cost analysis and give you a clear insight of what I'm calling a pay-to-play shift by Microsoft, introduce you to two credit currencies, and help you understand guardrails that you can put in place to avoid surprises on your invoice. And like I said, I've got a lot to cover. I'm going to be moving fast, and hopefully we'll have around 8 minutes reserved for the end for wrap-up and Q&A. So let's dive in on what's available today. So I want to start by saying that Copilot is not one product. It's actually a family name. It's kind of turning into something like Defender, where it's sprinkled all throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. So to start, everyone should be pretty much familiar with the Copilot Chat surface. It can be either web-grounded or with the premium license, grant permission and access to your work data. And then there's Copilot in Office. We've all seen this one, Copilot sprinkled across Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and so on. And then there's the Copilot Studio AI components. And then there are what I would call the AI pieces that are in the Azure infrastructure space. We're not really going to dive that deep into that piece, but those are all of the frontier scale AI components that are within all the Azure infrastructure pieces. And then there is Agent 365. We'll talk through what that is, but that mainly sits in the identity and governance space for agents. And then we'll talk about Copilot Cowork. A new one you may not have heard about. It's deemed a autopilot, a new type of agent, but called Microsoft Scout, and it's built on OpenClaw. We'll touch briefly on GitHub Copilot. And then I'll also share with you some 6 new agents that are more designed for IT operations and will be of great assistance here soon. They were released in August 1st, but this would be a little bit different than the Azure infrastructure pieces and more suited towards day-to-day operations within Azure. And so why does this matter? I mean, there's 9 boxes, 9 different surfaces that I've highlighted, right? Copilot spread across the whole ecosystem. And so each one of them have their own controls, their own cost measures, and the risk is not really understanding specifically what they are could lead to surprises on the invoices. So for the next hour, what we're going to do is we're going to dive in, right? 15 minutes on what each one of these do, the various places that you can control and configure it. And not diving in right now, but you can see they're all in different places. That's one of the big problems today. And then we'll talk about whether they're metered or not. And at a high level, green means free, blue means fixed, and red, yes, there's some sort of variable cost and or metering involved, and we'll explain that in detail. So the first one, Copilot Chat. Now, there's been a lot of rebranding. There's a lot of changes constantly going on in this space, but there's this notion of basic versus premium. So believe it or not, Copilot Chat Basic is actually free, but there's some stipulations, right? It's only rooted in the web. I'd like to think of this as a AI-enabled Google search. Now, I've got a little asterisk here about Outlook. So Microsoft rolled out with premium, and then they retreated, and then they allowed users to have this web-only tab versus the web or work, but they kept it in place in Outlook. So again, it's not tied to your work data. There is no persistent memory, and there's no access to agents. And in-app Copilot got a little weird. Microsoft doesn't really have a formal announcement on this, but there's basically a cut point. If you have 2,000 seats or less in your environment, this is where you'll still see those remnants of Copilot in the apps. Anybody that's in an environment that's above 2,000, that's been pulled out. And the key 2 words at the end, they're going to begin starting to throttle it now. Premium, that's where you get access to your Microsoft 365 data, your files, your context, the Graph API types of elements. And then this is when the work and web tab appears. If you're running a newer version of Copilot Chat, this is that Work IQ toggle button. And then Work IQ builds persistent context over time. And now it's opened up the ability to create agents, which used to only reside in Copilot Studio. So those are the high level pieces that you get for that approximately $30 a month per user for month 4. And then this functions as what I would like to call an asynchronous conversation with AI, where you're focusing on a single surface and you're trying to produce a single outcome, such as drafting an email, building a slide deck. And like I said, it can either be grounded web only, which is basic and free, or tied into your work data. Surface 2, there's the Copilot and Office apps. This is probably where most people first met Copilot. And, it's in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and Teams. It allows you to do that work right there in the apps where you already work. I don't know about you, the first time I was introduced to this, it was very lackluster. But today, it's grown significantly in a lot of its capabilities now. The premium allows you to ground it in your work data. And I'm going to talk about this a little later, but both with Copilot Chat and Copilot and Office apps, permissions, basically Copilot piggybacks on your existing access. There's a new term that's being used out there. It's called OBO, or on behalf of. For those that may have written scripts, PowerShell scripts and whatnot, this is similar to run as. Point being is Copilot Chat, Copilot, and Office apps is not going to have any more or any less access than your account yourself has. It's based on your permissions. Now, a little other surprise, right, is there's actually 2 different level of SKUs for Copilot. Now, it's kind of unfair, but Microsoft first released the enterprise version, and then they later came out with an SMB version. And you can see there's a lower price point for that, but I want to draw your eyes to the gray text in each one of these boxes. You can only use Copilot Business with a user that either has Business Basic, Standard, or Premium. And if they're running an E1, E3, E5, F1, F3, they have to use the enterprise version. And then to add further complication, they even came out with some bundles where they roll in Copilot together with Standard and with Business Premium. And then I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a new Cadillac SKU in town, and it's called E7. And all that means is that they took the E5, they've added Copilot, they've added Agent 365. Obviously, we're talking about Copilot right now. We'll get into Agent 365, but they've also added a component called Intro Suite. We won't cover that today, But those three things are bundled in to raise the enterprise bundle, new enterprise bundle E7 up to $99 a month. And that's the annual upfront per month price. So lots of digest there. Now, Surface 3 was a new move by Microsoft. This was the first time pay-to-play agents landed and almost started the token economy for Microsoft's environment overnight. So Cowork and Work IQ API. And I want to be very specific. These two came out. That's why I have, at the same time, that's why I have Work IQ API next to Cowork. And it is not this, that's not the toggle button that I talked about earlier. This is a separate interface, and I'll probably provide more details later. But Cowork is designed to be a multi-step AI agent that executes towards an end goal. And again, it accesses your files, chats, and connectors. And it's the next evolution up from what you may have seen as the researcher and analyst preview agents that were out there. And Cowork lives inside Copilot Chat as an experience. Now, here's the fun part. You have to have a Copilot premium license in order to even be able to access Cowork. And on top of it, there's no opt-out. What do I mean by this? Cowork requires and uses and consumes Copilot credits. So I call this the canary in the coal mine because, like I said, this is the first pay-to-play experience that was launched by Microsoft. So everything after this, you know, I would just expect that it's going to use some form of Copilot consumption. So like chat, how does this work? Where does this fit? Well, it's designed to be a multi-app, multi-output work. And this is where I get a little nervous, where you hand off the work. And the idea is that it plans, runs in the background, and checks in for your approval. I don't know about you, but this makes me uncomfortable. At least in Copilot Chat, it's an asynchronous conversation. I ask it a question, it responds with an answer. I have another question, I get another answer. This thing is going to be running in the background and checking in with me on occasion, but at the same time burning Copilot credits? Yeah, that's a pretty big change. Let's pivot to Surface 4, Copilot Studio. Now, Copilot Studio used to be the only place that agents were created, but now the lines are getting blurred with this premium where Studio and Chat can both create agents. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I was confused with Copilot Studio for a while. I kept thinking Visual Studio. I kept thinking, oh, this is a developer's thing, which is actually, I was crossing signals with what is known as GitHub Copilot. This is not what Copilot Studio is. It lives in Power Platform tied together with that low-code agent builder, and it can be metered, right? This is where, right, leave it to Microsoft to make it fuzzy, but there's a concept of premium agent execution, and whenever that occurs, it's going to actually consume some of those Copilot credits. And what is meant, what is the definition of premium? Well, the rule of thumb is that if a Copilot agent is triggered by an event or scheduled to run, it is deemed a premium agent and therefore consumes Copilot credits. Just think, if it runs on its own, unsupervised, that's going to likely generate Copilot credits and start ramping up costs. Another fun part about Copilot Studio is it actually is spread across 3 physical portals. The first one is the Power Platform Admin Center, then the Copilot Studio portal itself. I'm pretty sure y'all both know what those first 2 are, but they can also be found and sourced in the Power Automate portal, which is the make.powerautomate.com portal. And what is Studio's role, right? Again, why is AI here? What does this fit? Where does this fit? Well, it's designed for a line of business systems like Salesforce, Dynamics, REST APIs. But the point being, it sits in that area where all those Power Platform connectors live. And so, as you can see with 3 portals, it ends up becoming a big headache for governance, because the usage and the triggering and all that stuff stretches across all 3 of those portals. And then there comes Microsoft Scout. So this was built on OpenClaw, and it was announced at Microsoft Build 2026. And as of today, it's in frontier preview only. And this is what Microsoft is calling an autopilot. So what does that mean? It's an always-on personal AI agent with its own identity. It runs as a local app on the Windows 11 or Mac OS operating system. And kind of like Cowork, it connects to all this stuff, but it can use the browser, local files, and MCP servers. And as I mentioned, it's built on OpenClaw, and it's powered by WorkIQ, and it learns how you work over time. And so OpenClaw, a lot of people have been concerned about it potentially going off the rails sometimes. So Microsoft has put some identity, Intune, purview controls in place, and it uses what they are calling, this is MXC, it's a new capability of the operating system, and that was released. And MXC stands for Microsoft Execution Containers. And basically it keeps OpenClaw, keeps Scout in a bubble to prevent it from jumping off the rails. And then Agent 365 also plays in this space to provide additional governance. And as I mentioned, it's frontier preview only, and there's no general available, no GA date released as of yet. And so why does this matter? Well, an autopilot is the new archetype, right? Serves as its own identity, runs autonomously in the background, and it acts without prompting. But I want to draw your eyes to the bottom of that box. It's even more concerning because Scout actually consumes 2 different types of credits in parallel at the same time. It's expensive. But where does this fit, right? Microsoft is describing it as an always-on agent that must run on your machine locally, accessing the shell in the browser. And right now, for everybody in attendance, yeah, if you're going to walk into that pool, dip your toe in the pool, this is definitely pilot territory. You do not want to start looking at releasing this org-wide yet, and try to get an understanding of how much it consumes, right? Surface 6 is what I talked about earlier, the Azure infrastructure pieces, and this is just Copilot in the Azure space across the infrastructure. You may see some elements within Security Copilot. This kind of functions like a SOC and allows you to, threat investigation. You'll see some pieces of that on the 365 side, but they've also opened up and allowed basically Copilot to function within the Azure space. And then, of course, right, there are components within Azure that have Copilot sprinkled across in Fabric, the big data space and analytics, and then the Azure AI Foundry aspects, right? So that's all the connectivity and the plumbing. So AI is not being, but it's been released in Azure across all these different components. And like I said, we're not going to dive deep into this, but it's another area that it can run. And so, again, this is in Azure, right? So it has nothing to do with the 365 admin. And therefore, it's all controlled by the Azure portal. And the billing runs alongside or, as a component of your standard consumption-based Azure billing and invoicing that you know today. In Surface 7 are these new Azure Copilot agents that I was mentioning earlier. So there used to be this generic agent mode that was in Azure, and that was retired August 1st of this month, right? I don't know how many people were even aware of that, but in its replacement, they've named 6 agents. The first one that they've deemed to be GA is what is called the observability agent, and it sits in Azure Monitor, and it's accessed from an alert. So observability agent has to do with monitoring and those different aspects, monitoring management of Azure objects. Now, they say it's GA, but they don't have a cost model published, right? So it's kind of in this weird preview, not charged, but it's uncertain if it's going to charge in the future. And then there's 5 other agents. I'm going to actually walk through these. It may sound a little redundant, but I'm pretty excited about this because this is more IT operations focused. So imagine a deployment agent that helps you figure out how to deploy new Azure services or components. A troubleshooting agent that allows you to troubleshoot issues and problems in Azure. And mind you, since these agents are running in your Azure tenant, it's aware of your environment and all of the details. An optimization agent to help you tune and increase efficiency across your Azure services. Even a resiliency agent to help for BCDR and failover. And then there's also a new migration agent announced to help move those Azure services, maybe across different subscriptions from one to another, or, resource groups. Some of those things can be challenging, but imagine these agents and allowing your IT infrastructure team to access these to help them do their day-to-day tasks. I think it's pretty powerful. Now, there are controls that have been released to allow you there's a master switch to turn them on or off. There's supposed to be the ability to turn them on or off individually and control access to them. And as I had said, the generic agent was retired August 1st. However, for our tenant, it's still showing an approval is pending. So I find it kind of weird. They're retiring things, but they're not quite letting the new replacements be available. And because we're still in this approval pending state, we don't see the ability to manipulate those per agent settings. This is different than what I've talked about before because this is the first opt-out surface. So you have the ability to turn this off if you don't want to use them. However, if you don't configure anything, they'll be enabled by default. I don't think that's a big deal because who's going to use it? It's going to be your IT admins, right? And it sits in the Azure plane where users don't play, right? Maybe your developer teams, you probably want to be concerned about turning those pieces off because this may enable your developers to get a little more creative than they already are today. So yeah. And then the final plane that I'd hinted at is Agent 365, right? So this is the governance plane for all AI agents, and it has basically 3 jobs. One is to observe or take inventory of all the agents that are accessing the 365 tenant, whether they're Microsoft created, internally created, or third party. And it will also sniff out shadow local agents that you may not even be aware of. It also provides governance, and there's a new world coming where every agent's going to have its own identity that you can actually manage, see, and detect and look at what it's doing. And then it allows you to secure agents and what they have access to and actually assign owners to those agents. And then also put in alerting that if a user is separated from your organization, you can get an alert to say, hey, you need to find a new owner for this agent that's running in the environment. So the best way to think about Agent 365 as a mental model, unfortunately, but fortunately, this is basically intro P1 or 2 for humans, or for agents, right? Just like you do for your humans today. So think about all the conditional access policies and all that other stuff. And unfortunately, I've got bad news. It's a separate standalone SKU that can be added. We'll get into the costs and the details a little later, but it's roughly $15 per user per month, or as I mentioned earlier, it's bundled in that E7. The good news, if there was any, is that Agent 365 is a fixed cost. There's no variability to it. What the agents do can potentially be metered. So Lens 1 recap. So I think that was the easy part. So the key takeaways, right, are the lines are blurring between Copilot Chat and Studio and where agents can be created. Cowork and Scout seem to be kind of playing in the same space. And the old surface boundaries are getting blurred as well. Agents are becoming first class. The model's actually shifting from people using tools to actual agents doing work, and in some cases on their own. In some cases, they use those OBO or they have their own permissions and access. And as I mentioned, not everything is licensed the same. And we'll soon, in Lens 3, get into how those variances are there. So let's get into the controls. So I think the biggest, most earth-shattering thing, at least for me, to realize is this is forcing a shift in identity, right? Yesterday, all you had to worry about was users and shared accounts, the traditional model. Now I introduced this concept of OBO agents, right, on behalf of, kind of the same as run as, and now we have these autonomous agents kind of doing what they want, right? Maybe frowned upon, but I kind of think of bots, right? Agents, I use synonymous with bots. Bots just running around doing whatever they need to do, right? So this really changes the perspective on the identity model, right? So here you have an agent, and as I've been walking into this new Copilot experience, AI experience, well, you have this agent, you have a human asking it questions, you have the agent responding, right? That asynchronous chat or Copilot in apps, kind of makes sense, but it's evolving. It's evolving so quickly, right? You can have an agent run through different interfaces to access data sources, MCP servers, APIs. You can have an agent talk to an app. You can have an agent access data sources themselves directly through those APIs and interfaces. You can even have an agent talk to other LLMs. And then, yeah, believe it or not, you could have agents talk to other agents. So, wow, this changes everything, right? That's why there's a kind of a warning sign on each one of these interfaces, because that's a new potential attack vector. That's a new security area of concern or control, right? How many interactions are happening? What are the costs involved? The token economy across each one of those lines. It feels like it's 10 times the surface area to worry about now. Now, Microsoft's current answer to this is Agent 365. And let me help you try to help you understand where it fits. So Intra is the identity plane, right? It gives every agent its own Intra agent ID. And its conditional access engine evaluates the agent as a subject before issuing a token. So those same CAs that you use for your users can now be used for agents. Obviously, Purview is the data plane. So the same DLP, sensitivity labels, retention, and audit that you already trust can be extended now to agents automatically. So the agent can inherit the tenant policies and all the other settings you have for your users. Defender, right? That's the threat plane. It treats each agent as a new attack surface, detecting suspicious agent behavior in near real time, right? Correlating humans and agents in one XDR incident path, right? So they had to kind of bring that into that interaction map. And then Intune obviously is the device plane. It's how you deploy and get local agents, which Scout's a new local agent, right? And it feeds device compliance signals, as we know, into Intra's conditional access. So, that can open up the door to say, hey, I will only allow you to run local agents on devices that are corporate owned and compliant. But I want to draw your eye to that bottom right bullet. Now local agents, this is in preview mode, this was just released. Agent 365 has the ability to inventory local agents that are discovered on those endpoints managed by Intune. Yeah, it's growing rapidly. So the big catch with Agent 365 is what I talked about earlier. It's a separate add-on. It's licensed per user and not per agent. I think that's good, because I can see not too far, right, in the future, you may have 50 employees that are using 300 agents. So you would need a seat for every person who interacts with or manages or sponsors agents which are managed by Agent 365. Okay, so let's talk about all of the other products and where governance actually lives. Some enable it, some govern it, and then some only show you what's already there. So this kind of typical Microsoft fashion, right? So there's the 365 Admin Center. What's there? Well, Copilot settings, your Frontier options, cost management, and license management. And I'm going to pause for a minute and talk about Frontier. Frontier is a word that's been thrown around a lot lately, and it can be confusing. In some circles, Frontier, in this specific example, it's synonymous with preview. So when I talk about Frontier here, what I mean is preview mode of all things Copilot, whether that's agents or Cowork or these different capabilities and features. You'll also hear in Microsoft's conferences and webinars, they talk about Frontier as meaning like an enterprise scale capable AI model. So it's basically, a commercial grade, right, type of agent versus open source or something like that. But in the context in this slide, Frontier means preview. Then you have the Intra Admin Center that has agent identities, conditional access, and workload identities. There are also some agent settings specifically in there. Defender, as I mentioned, all of the agent pieces there, Purview, Intune. Then you have Power Platform Admin, and then you have the new Azure Copilot Admin Center. It's a new component that manages those 6 new agents that came out. And then there's even this new security dashboard for AI, ai.security.microsoft.com. Best way to think of this is it's almost like a scorecard. Remember, you have a scorecard, security scorecard in 365 or in Azure. Well, here's one that they published for AI, and it has some shadow AI inventory components in there. So you have 2, 4, 6, 8 different portals where Copilot sprinkled across, right? Almost feels like a probability and statistics problem. So again, talking about Frontier, I'm going to dial into places where these settings and these configurations live. And no joke, I was checking this literally before I was doing this presentation, and they moved them yet again. So it's just constantly evolving and hard to keep up. So Frontier controls, I've got the path of where they're located there in your tenant. And so this is where you go to opt in for tenant level preview features. And it allows you to scope who even has access to these Frontier pieces, right? My recommendation would be not to enable this tenant wide, but use, get your IT team involved, maybe your power users. And this is where the gates for Scout and other previews sit. And like I said, it behaves like a preview. I just wanted to make sure y'all are aware of that when I'm talking about Frontier. And like Scout, you may see old naming conventions like Claw Pilot. So again, it's constantly changing. So Frontier, right? Think of beta or preview release. And then there's this agent marketplace. What am I talking about, agent marketplace? Well, if you go in Copilot Chat and you go agents, all agents, there's this new marketplace that sits out there. And here's where you can go. You can actually turn on or turn off 3 different source types of agents. Those that are created by Microsoft, Cowork would be in that. Any agents that are internally built or any third-party agents that have been published. And yeah, there's third parties now throwing agents into your marketplace. So you can high level control who has the ability to install or publish agents. And then you can even, if you want, get into the long list of third-party agents and specify which ones can or cannot be allowed. Or if you want at the top level, you can just turn them all off. And then just that reminder, right? Your users can now build agents from Copilot Chat, not just Copilot Studio. And then there's Scout. Let's talk about the 2 gates to enable Scout, right? There's 2 credit areas that it uses, but Scout is not enabled by default, thankfully. But here's the multi-step process that you would have to go through if you wanted to turn it on. So number 1, you have to be enrolled in Frontier because it's in preview mode, right? And then you'd have to go in to the settings and turn on the Frontier Scout for specific groups, right? Again, don't do tenant wide. And then you also have to ensure that those users have AI admin role assigned. So enable frontier access and then go do all of this stuff in Intune and GitHub. GitHub, this is where GitHub comes on the scene in this presentation. So there's actually an ADMX that's been published by Microsoft that you have to basically import and then configure it to allow Scout. And then there's basically some different settings for Mac OS. And then you actually have to go in and do an attestation, like agree to a legal document. And then you have to ensure that you either have GitHub Copilot Business or Enterprise license enabled for your tenant. And I've got a couple slides on that to give you a view into what that looks like and how that costs and how many credits are involved with that. So 2 gates to get Scout enabled. Okay. Whew, we've gone through a lot. So let's look back at Lens 2. So key takeaway, right? An identity is now non-human too. Microsoft's first attempt at governing this is Agent 365. And the governance lives across many, many portals, right? And if you want to turn on preview or frontier mode, well, let's do that deliberately for a specific small set of users, and let's not enable that tenant-wide. And then a 2-gate model is going to be the new normal for those autonomous agents, and Scout's a preview of that, right? Okay, save the best for last. I hope everybody's awake. But now let's talk about costs and what controls that you can put in place. So there's 3 cost tiers at a high level. We've already talked about the free one, right? That's for Copilot Basic. And so I want to draw your eye to Surface 1, right? So Surface 1 is basic, so there's no license needed. We covered all that. And EDP, just for those that are looking at that, EDP stands for Enterprise Data Protection. That's where Microsoft promises that it's not going to use your chats and your content to train its models. And then there's this tier 2, which is a fixed price. We got into this with the Copilot Premium, and that's where Surfaces 1 and 2 sit. Surface 1 is Copilot and Office app. Surface 2 is Copilot Premium, which enables Work IQ, that toggle, that work button, right? And again, right, it allows agent creation and chat, plus access to those basic pre-built agents that we talked about in the marketplace. And then there's this metered tier that we haven't gotten into yet, but we're about to dive in there. I'm going to open your eyes and give you a view into what to be aware of. So this basically sits above the 365 and is in Surfaces 3 to 7, which is Cowork, Copilot Studio, the Work IQ API, right? Not just Work IQ, but the API, and Scout. And all of those consume Copilot credits. We'll talk about Scout's dual meter in the next slide. And then I just wanted to be consistent. Again, Azure, the infrastructure pieces, the AI stuff there is built separately in its own plane and on a consumption-based model. Okay, so everything above above Copilot Premium is metered. And what's not on here, and this is why I put this note here, Agent 365 really doesn't fit here. That's that governance, it's a fixed cost, right? So 2 credit currencies. So we're going to dive into, right, that metered tier, and let's have a look at Copilot credits. As I mentioned, it's used by Cowork, Work IQ API, Studio, and Scout. And bad news, you don't get any credits with your Microsoft 365 Premium subscription. It pulls at a tenant level, and you can put guardrails in place for your Copilot credits. You can put a cap at the top level tenant, and you can actually configure per user limits. And along with that, you can configure alerts as you get close to the caps, maybe 50, 75%, or 100%. And then there's this GitHub AI credit section. And again, this appears on the scene in this presentation because of Scout. Your developers would use this as part of Copilot Chat and coding. Now, it's included with a GitHub business or a GitHub enterprise license, and you get 1,900 credits with business and 3,900 with enterprise. And if anybody's recently signed up, I just wanted to put a note here. There's a promo going on, so those amounts are doubled, but it's going to end September 1st. And overage charges are a cent per credit. And it's pulled at an enterprise level, not per seat. And there's no rollovers. But cost center caps draw from the shared pool. And so on the Azure plane, right, there's that separate invoice. You got those Azure Copilot agents. The costs are unknown right now, and those 5 others are still in preview. And then, yeah, your Azure consumption billing occurs normally. Okay, so metered, we've got 2 different pools. Okay, so Copilot credits, how can I purchase them? Well, there's 3 ways to buy. One is pay as you go, and that's 1 cent per credit. There's no commitment. It's billed monthly via Azure. Now, I know it may sound like I'm contradicting myself. We've been talking about 365 credits. Well, what you do is you create a tie-in or a cost line that attaches it to a resource group on your Azure subscription. So it will appear as a line item on your Azure bill. What I was talking about earlier was Azure services, right, that are using AI. They would just be bundled together as a consumption model for your typical Azure service usage. This would appear as, again, a line item on the Azure invoice. And pay as you go serves as an overage catcher for any of the other models that I'll cover on the right-hand side. Microsoft has allowed and provided capacity packs. As an example, you can get 25,000 credits. This is the smallest one for $200. If you do the math, that looks like a 20% discount, but there's a little bit of a catch. It's a monthly subscription, so it's a commitment. There's no rollover. And you want to start getting into this in the next one I'm talking about if you have a steady, predictable baseline. And here's the catch. This is only cheaper than PayGo if you were to consume all 25,000 credits, right? If you burn 15 or 20, pay as you go is still the better route. So that's why you want to make sure you have a steady baseline before you even consider doing this. And then the final one is P3, pre-purchase payment, right? That's where they got the 3 Ps. So the minimum pack that you can get for this one is 3,000 credits a year, and it is an annual prepay. Now it's locked 20% off, and it's MAC eligible. What do I mean by MAC? MAC stands for Microsoft Azure Consumption Commitment. And for those that are in this meeting that are on an enterprise agreement or an MCA, that's where you have to commit to a minimum spend on Azure. And so P3 purchases contribute to that. And it's a single pool that can be used across Copilot Studio, Dynamics 365, and Chat. And it auto renews annually. So again, we talked about GitHub before, but they're not really brought up here. And they're enterprise pooled, and they're only relevant because of the Scout conversation, right? This would be all of the other things. So the recommended approach, again, I want to stress this, is use either of the 2 right columns, 2 right options, if you have an established baseline, and leverage pay as you go above that, right, for overages. Otherwise, if you're in early stages, just stay as PayGo in order to get an understanding of how much you're using it. So cost visibility, right? Usage, all that stuff, right? Unfortunately, got some bad news right now. Microsoft does not have it solved. I mean, you can kind of get the setup. You have all these different portals. You have all these different configurations, all in different areas. So you've got the admin portal, right? It's one thing that I talked about. That's where the Copilot credits sit. You got the Power Platform. Again, Copilot credits, but that's where Copilot Studio, Dynamics, and the Power Apps are used. Using your Copilot credits, and then GitHub, again, for Scout. Now, what hurts is you can only see totals per tenant or total credits used per user, but you can't find the actions behind them. And let me be very specific, not from the admin side, not from the server side. There are some commands that you can run, for example, in Cowork, like /cost, but that's client side. So for those of you who have a bill back model, all you can do at this point is show totals, total credits used per user, total used at the tenant or maybe even department, but you can't show what it is they did that led to those costs. So until Microsoft fixes that, totals are all anyone gets right now. I'm paying attention to that. And then Cowork, right? So the big thing with this is they went GA and mandated billing in 2 weeks. And I don't know about y'all, but it seems to be kind of a recurring pattern, right? It seems backwards from how IT has gone to market for decades. This is why I'm labeling this the canary in the coal mine. So back in March of 26, Cowork was announced as a Frontier preview free. And then all of a sudden, right? So March, I wasn't really interested. And then somewhere between March and June, we kind of played around with it. But all of a sudden on June 16th, they said, hey, Microsoft announced Cowork's going to go GA on July 1st, and it's going to be pay as you go. So here we are, enabled it. All of a sudden, they gave a release date, and they said in 2 weeks, you're going to get charged for it. I can't remember the last time that Microsoft has announced anything. Like, what if I was out on vacation? Any of y'all were out on vacation for 2 weeks? That's how fast things are moving. So have a look at Cowork. Is the setup complete in your tenant? Do you have spending policies in place with alerts that I've talked about? And 2 weeks from preview to GA with billing, I mean, that's kind of setting a precedent for the next metered surface, right? It's pretty wild. And so, yeah, meaning Cowork and WorkIQ are leading indicators of the new token economy, right? That's pretty wild. Okay, so I want to dive in a little bit and talk about WorkIQ API, right? So this is important, and I wanted to make sure that I shared this with you because I've had some clients come to me and they said, hey, the business has decided that they don't want to do Copilot. They want to bring in Gemini or Anthropic or whatever. I'm kind of calling this bring your own AI, right? Now, the minute those people that made that decision want to start looking at their 365 data, there's going to be a cost involved. And that's why I want to break this down. So let's look. Door one, right? Let's just say you bring Gemini or Chat GPT as is, right? It's free, yeah, but it knows nothing about the tenant. So what ends up happening? People start pasting their work content into that tool to compensate. Unfortunately, this is the definition of shadow AI, and it creates a DLP exposure, right? The worst kind of free. That's how it's going to cost you. Door two, let's say, all right, fine. Let's build your own agent and point it to Microsoft Graph directly. Yeah. Graph itself is largely free to call, but it returns only raw data. It doesn't return reasoning, and you now have to rebuild or stand up everything WorkIQ does. What is that? That's retrieval, indexing, and the important one, re-implementing all those permissions that I talked about in compliance in your own layer. And then if you want to start doing bulk extraction from Graph, because LLMs love big piles of data, well, that could potentially get into metering at about 75 cents per thousand objects. So it's not a line item. It ends up being an engineering bill and a security surface that you didn't want. And then finally, again, they want to bring their own AI, but, right, they turn it to WorkIQ API. Well, that's turnkey, grounded, governed, and permission aware, right? That's better than the graph thing that I was just talking about. But the meter runs in Copilot credits. Copilot credits. It's variable now. And reasoning, it runs around 0.1 credit per tool call. So ultimately, what ends up happening is they swapped out a predictable per seat license, right? If they had bought Copilot Premium, and ended up with likely higher variable Copilot costs they were trying to avoid. So the punchline, right, is the cheaper looking path of bring your own eye will likely end up costing more if they want to start touching their work data, right? It'll cost them more if they would have just bought premium Copilot. So that's a good conversation to have with your leadership if they ever want to look at work IQ. It's been huge benefit for me for my day-to-day. So Scout, let's dive into that dual meter reality that it uses, right? So I mentioned earlier, it uses GitHub AI credits. And here's where the cost of that looks like. So that is $19 or $39 per user per month, whether you're using business or enterprise. And we talked about the amount of credits that you get and the overages. And then there's a 10% uplift if you have FedRAMP or residency data requirements. And then it also consumes Copilot credits. And on both sides of the house, the rates haven't really been defined. Again, Scout's in preview, but yeah, an autonomous agent consuming out of these two buckets at the same time sounds pretty concerning, right? Just something to be aware of. Okay, so I've gone through the cost models, all the different breakdowns, the different buckets, the things that you can buy. So what are some guardrails that you can enable for these metered services? All right, number one, avoid enabling tenant-wide and lock it down to a limited set of users, right? Set caps on both those meters, right? Both in Copilot credits and GitHub. Turn on alerts for those caps at 50, 75, or 100%, so you know before you hit the wall. And then number 4 and number 5, think about the right procurement and deployment model, right? Start with pay-go. Don't commit to anything until you have your baselines established. You may think you're saving that 20%, but as I've shown before, if you don't use it all, you end up paying more than if you had done with pay-go. And then, yeah, that note about the FedRAMP and GCC 10% uplift. And then confirm you have the proper Cowork billing set up. And know where each meter reports, right? All the different places that I've shown you. So to recap, right, the old flat rate mental model's dead. That Copilot Premium license does not cover any of the tier 3 things that I talked about, right? Agents, Cowork, Copilot Studio, or Scout. It doesn't really buy anything. For Cowork, it's the prerequisite to even use Cowork. For Scout, yep, there's those 2 currencies that burn in parallel, and you can buy those pools in advance. And cost data lives in 3 different places. So pilot first, put your caps in, and get your alerts going. That's the main defense against surprise invoices. So now that busy matrix that I started with, right, it's complete in your head. But I think the most important part is the last column. You now have a clear understanding of what's free, what's fixed in blue, and what is metered in red, and all of the things that you can put in place to lock those areas down. So let me give you an offer. As part of your attendance to this webinar, we will open up the ability and do a Copilot exposure check for your tenant. So you've seen our matrix. The best version is one with your data in it. So what does that look like? We're talking about maybe a 60-minute screen share where we walk through all of those rows and surfaces. We see what's turned on or off and have a look at, you know, your Copilot licensing and subscription review. And so at the end of the day, you'll get your matrix filled in. The cost management piece is turned on. You'll have a clear understanding of the caps and alert thresholds. More than just a slide deck, right? And what is it going to cost? Nothing. That's what we offer to you at no obligation and no sal waiting at the end of it. So, wow, I've got 6 minutes. I was aiming for 8, but so just a quick time check, running real quick. So before we get into questions, Jillian, do you want to go ahead and post that feedback and AI request form in the Teams chat? For the audience here, for those that are interested, right, please fill out that form if you want to talk to us more about your AI interests, or you want to have us do that Copilot exposure check for you. So yeah. Any questions? I know we went through a lot. Let me check chat real quick. Oh no, did I have some audio problems? I'm just reading the chat, y'all. Okay. Awesome. I find it hard to believe that there's no questions, but I'm not going to drag it out much longer. I really appreciate y'all giving your time with us during lunch. And like I said, if y'all have any interests, I mean, this again, I'm the Microsoft Practice Manager, was focused on Copilot, but we're doing a lot of things in the AI space. So if you have any interest, feel free to fill out that form. It's just a simple one pager. We're not asking for much. I think we even have an option there to say, hey, yeah, no, I'm not interested, but yeah, please give me an exposure check. So thank y'all very much. I appreciate it, and y'all have a great afternoon. Thank you.